Welcome to the Leadership and Love podcast. We will cover leadership, mindset, personal development, and sales and marketing. You will experience thought-provoking conversations with both nationally and internationally recognized leaders. Our goal is to inspire you and deliver actionable items that you can implement that are going to help you accelerate your growth. Get ready to discover the magic and the power when you lead with love. I'm here with a dear and lifelong friend of mine, Danette Hughes. And Danette and I crossed paths probably about 15 years ago at this point. And she was a teacher at the Wakanda High School at the time, and I had just started volunteering with the FBLA students. And I could tell you a number of things about Danette. And first off, she's just an A1 teacher. And I know that because after she left Wakanda, the students talked about her for years. So she had a big impression on them. And what she's been doing since she left Wakanda is literally teaching around the world to students in a bunch of different countries. And so I'll let her explain a little bit more about that. And then now she's actually back for a semester here in Illinois, which is just, it made my day when I heard she was going to be close enough to go to lunch, have breakfast, those kinds of things. So Danette, first off, thank you very much for taking the time. It's an honor to have you here. Is there anything you'd like to add to your introduction so people kind of get an idea, feel for who you are and what you've been up to?
Gosh, I'm kind of a spur of the moment type of person. I like to travel a lot, and I just decided one day to sell my house, pack everything up, put my life in 4 boxes, and move to across the world. So I like to try new experiences.
And so what was the impetus that started that whole thing, that whole process?
I fluctuated between education and business, and I was back in business, and I was doing something that was good, but I didn't find it as rewarding as teaching. I really miss teaching. But then I was at a point in my life where my kids were grown, the house was up for sale, and I thought, you know what? I want to go back into teaching, and heck, I might as well just sell everything and move to the other side of the world and try that. Not knowing the language, never been to the country Taiwan, so it was quite an experience. So that's why probably this talk could focus more on personal development for maybe those who are kind of nervous about doing something like that. And just by being there, I've been able to travel, gosh, to probably over 50 countries. So very, very lucky.
And so you bring up a couple of very good points. One of the things that we're going to talk about today with Danette is leadership and how to lead yourself in that personal development. And so one of the things I find fascinating, I actually have been kind of stalking Danette over the years because she takes these
Yeah.
beautiful pictures from literally around the world. And to her point, she's traveled all over the world, the South, the far Southeast, in Indonesia and those areas, in Europe. She's been, like she said, 50 countries. She takes these magnificent pictures, but that's probably a story for another day when she's in the middle of doing a book with those pictures. But for
Yeah.
today, I'd like you to talk about, first off, where did you find the courage as you had been married and you were divorced. So as a single woman to just break out and literally, to your point, move halfway around the world. What had you done in personal development that had given you the ability, the courage to think, well, I'm going to go do this?
Maybe by being independent for a while. I mean, boy, you make it sound so fabulous. It was basically uh, life short, and I've lived in the US for quite a long time, obviously. And I thought, you know what? I just had the impetus to travel. When I was at Wakanda, I was fortunate enough to go with the kids to a spring break field trip to Europe. And that kind of really started it. So after that, then after I left Wakanda and was in business, and again, trying to realize what I want to do with my life, I just decided this is probably as good as time as any. And so that's really it. You make it sound so much more thought out and practical and great, but it was really just me deciding, let's try something different. If it doesn't work, and I always come back. But it worked out really well.
It's worked out great, but I'd like to point out to our listeners. So one of the things that Danette just dropped is what I consider a golden nugget, and that is there's no time better than now. And she said something very, very powerful. She just had a choice, and she chose what she
Hmm.
wanted, and then was brave enough to follow through with it. So when we
Hmm.
talk about personal development, Danette, can you tell our
Hmm.
listeners what's something that you've found over the years that you've used to help you learn personally, to learn, so you went to a country where you didn't know the language, you didn't know the customs. So what's something that you've used or you could share with our leaders that's a habit or something that you've used to improve your own personal development for your own learning?
Okay. Probably number one, be open-minded. Number two would be empathy. I tend to talk about that quite a bit in my classes as well. Uh, put yourself obviously in the other person's situation and try to understand it, and just go with a positive attitude. And if you don't know something, ask questions. There's many times in Taiwan specifically where I will just smile and point to things because I don't know what I'm eating, but if you, and you know what? People are generally very helpful and very kind. I have not run into anyone who is rude in any of the countries. And yes, that includes France. The French were one, I know that stereotype, but I've never encountered anyone who was rude. And if you just kind of go with a positive attitude, and they appreciate, and people in other countries appreciate when they have tourists, and they appreciate that we're coming there to learn from them. And I think that's part of it, is just understanding that we don't live in our little microcosm here, that obviously the world is huge. And I think it's important for everyone to basically travel, just to learn about other customs and cultures, and again, we have empathy.
So you touched on a couple of things, and let's go back to empathy for a minute. So for you, what does empathy look like in your day-to-day life and as a leader and teacher of others?
Uh, I think as a society, because of social media, we tend to judge quickly, and we listen for little sound bites. I even tell my students sometimes we're a Twitter or X feed, whatever that may be, whatever you want to call it, society, where we know a little bit about a lot. But again, even when I ask my students to go a little deeper, I said, we know this part, but now what do we know here, here, and here? So always ask those why, or so what, so can you dig a little deeper with that? So in that, you are using critical thinking skills. And I think that's so important now, is again, just to understand people. And we all have backgrounds, baggage, and try to understand where other people are coming from. I just talked about that in my class today about judging students. And I said I was a new teacher this semester, and students are judging me as soon as I walk in the door, whether they think I'm going to give them a lot of work or not. And then I tell them, and then that goes hand in hand. I'm looking at certain students too. And I've had this situation several times in my years of teaching, where I'm looking at some kids thinking, oh boy. And it turns out, I was telling the story today where this one student of mine was actually, he didn't look the part, but he was actually the smartest student in my class. And by looking, we were talking about direct and indirect characterization. And he came to my class kind of, the baggy black shirt, the baggy saggy black pants, and I was, I judged him. And I was telling my students today that he was the smartest one in the class in terms of discussing novels, and just the critical thinking that he contributed to the conversation. So that's
So
what I mean by that.
yeah, so this is beautiful because there's two things there that I want to go a little deeper on. The first one is judgment, and then the second will be the critical thinking. So it's fascinating to me. At one time in a meditation, the wisdom came to me that when we judge, we eliminate the ability to love unconditionally, and we all do it, right? We were raised that way. We look at people, we judge them, and then bam, and then it sometimes it blows up the relationship before we can ever develop it. So
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so somebody that's in that kind of environment where there's that many people that you know right off the bat you have to make some sort of assessment and then work with them over the next semester or year. What have you done to kind of help you take the edge off of that judgment to give everybody a fair shake in the classroom?
I always start with humor. And as I'm laughing now, um, I just I just let them know that I'm here to help them, you know, so when they complain about I'm kind of setting them up. First of all, I would love to give them food, you know, pay them off. And then but it's basically letting them know that I'm here to help them. And if they don't understand something, to be totally open about it. And I guess that can apply to life, that if you show you're open and willing to understand and learn from people, because I tell my students, we we tend to listen to respond, we don't listen to understand. So sometimes when we're talking and someone says something, and I can be kind of snarky too, you know, we're already ready for that comeback and we're not listening to everything else they're saying because I've already got in my mind, ooh, that's a good zinger. I'm gonna zing that person back with this. And then you're not listening to anything else they say. And so I try to tell my students, basically, in our society, let's listen more instead of just respond.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think that's very powerful for leaders of any organization, right? Whether you're in a family, whether you're a teacher in a classroom, whether you're in a company. I would completely agree with you. We don't listen, and it's becoming a lost art, right? It
Mhm.
takes practice to be a very good listener, to listen long enough. One of the things I like to share with people, I learned this, I forget where now, but let somebody finish talking, and then when they're done talking, take a breath, because they're probably not done talking. They're just pausing to take a breath. And if you take a breath, it's going to let them go on instead of you talking over them. One of the
Mhm.
things I think that you're touching on just such wisdom. One of the things I like to go back. Well, I think that this is what's so fascinating for me about doing this podcast is that as I talk to people, everybody has wisdom in some way, shape, or form about something.
Yeah.
And so if you ask the right questions, you said something very powerful earlier about, and this is again, I'd like leaders to take this away for something they can implement immediately. Whatever your challenge is in your family, in your organization, wherever you may be, if you ask everybody in the organization for help or a solution, you'll be amazed at who's going to have a wisdom that you don't have. And I've had in one of my own companies, we had a problem in production with the body shop. We had a problem with the guys in the back had a challenge with production. I got the entire company together, and oddly enough, one of the females that worked in the office never fixed a car. She had the solution. But had we not put
Mhm.
everybody in the room and asked the question, we'd have never got her wisdom. So what you said was very powerful about, asking people and understanding that you need to listen because they have wisdom and experience you don't have. It's why I
Mhm.
love doing this podcast because I get to talk to people like you, Danette, who we've known each other for a long time. But again, these conversations bring out things that I don't know about you and that you might not even thought about. So I'd like to
Mhm.
go back to the other point that you touched on, critical thinking. What do you do? And I think this is on the verge of the listening too as well. It's starting to be a lost art to be able to critically think, right? People just get information from these sound bites like you were talking about in social media and other places, and then they just go with that being the gospel. That's the truth. That's the only option. And I saw it on TV, so it must be true. So, what's one of the
Mhm.
things that you teach people, students specifically, on how to
Mhm.
critical think?
Okay. Well, it starts even with putting together a paragraph. I start, you know, this is very simplistic, but the PEE method, what's your point, what's your evidence, and what's your explanation? Excuse me. So, you know, if they make something, I want them in the back of their mind. I'm sitting here on their shoulder saying, "So what?" So keep going. Okay. So, and, you know, and keep going like that. So kind of, you know, that old, you know, peeling away the onion layers. Well, that's what I want them to do because just today I was talking about how a memory when I was in college, I was in an art history class and we had to analyze. and we had to go to an art exhibit and analyze a painting. I wrote 4 pages on this one painting. And it's basically, again, staring at something and just looking at every little nuance of it. And then just, again, thinking, what is the painter really trying to express here? What's his theme? What's his tone? All that. And so that's what I try to instill in my students. I said, for example, when we're reading poetry, there's some poetry by the British lit authors that I have no idea what they're talking about. So again, I have to research them. But I always say, read the author, kind of do some background information, then understand where the author's coming from. Because sometimes, if he's writing something about kind of negative about women, I'm like, oh, that guy just went through a divorce, or, just something like that, or mental health struggles. So I always try to find out a little bit of background if possible. But again, going back to your topic, um, again, just why does the person look this way? What triggered the person to act this way? And prove it in that dialogue that you've read.
Right. And I think that's a very good point, because I think that kind of analysis and critical thinking can make it a whole lot easier, one, to be empathetic, which is what you've talked about. And the other thing is to try to get to a resolution or solution, because to your point, you've got somebody kind of looking at the world through your glasses, if you will.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, so it's kind of giving them a different perspective. And I'll tell students, if they have to write, for example, a persuasive essay, and it'll be on a piece that we've talked about, and they always say, well, how many pages? And I said, well, and I usually say enough to sell me. So if you can pick a particular theme or topic, this pertains to society, if you can sell me on your belief and then cite evidence, you know, real evidence, like we always talk about your sources, check your reliable sources. And if you can sell me on it, because sometimes it's a perspective that I never thought of. And that is in life as well. It's not just reading a novel, because I could walk away with my background something totally different than what a 16 or 17 or 18-year-old student is going to walk away with, or any of us, because we're all placing our perspectives into something from our previous experiences. So I say, okay, be empathetic toward that, and learn from each other.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, because one of the things you just touched on is check your sources. One of the things that's become very evident to me in the last, I don't know, year or two specifically, is gossip, and how destructive
Hmm.
that is, and how, as
Yeah.
a leader, somebody's going to tell you something, and it's just gossip, right? They don't have, to your point, they don't have any hard evidence. They have no
Hmm.
proof. It's just their idea of something, or their point of view, or them just creating hate and discontent just because they want to create hate and discontent. And
Hmm.
often, and I know I've been guilty of this in the past, is that somebody will tell me something and then I'll run with it, right? And then I'll
Hmm.
go say
Yeah,
or
we're
do.
human.
Well, right. And then I'll go say or do something that I regret later, because the information I got wasn't accurate. So one of the things I like to ask is why, right? It's what I learned in the Toyota way. I don't know if you're familiar with lean manufacturing, but they teach the 5 whys. If you ask why 5 times, doesn't always take 5, but usually you're going to get to the root of the problem or what's going on. But at that point, we're dealing with real evidence, not hearsay, gossip, or whatever that may be. What's one of the things that you've done? Because as I said at the top of the episode, it was amazing to me. It was amazing to me how much the kids remembered you, how highly they thought of you, and and how deeply you impacted them. Because I wasn't exaggerating. For years after you were gone, everybody's still talking about Miss Hughes. So I'd like to share with our listeners, as the leader in front of that classroom, there's no doubt you were leading with love, because they wouldn't be talking about the way that they wouldn't be speaking of you the way they were had you not touched their hearts. So what do you do on a regular basis? Because it's clear that, and you may not even be aware of all of it at this point, right? It's just become who you are in front of a classroom, but what are you aware of, and the things that you do when you're leading that classroom that touches their hearts?
Well, I've had a couple students tell me uh, I treated them with respect and I treated them like adults. That's number one. And it's funny you mention that because I just had a couple students come in my class after school today. And I've only been at my new school for about 3 weeks. And the kids come in and they say, "Oh, we always stop in." And so I'm like, "Oh, hi." And they told me, "Yeah, we missed the previous teacher." And what they'll say is they'll say some of the students said they missed, the previous teacher, and they said they liked him because he gave lots of packets. Okay, and I said, "Okay." And then and two of the students said to me, they said, "But we like you because you make us think." And so I thought, wow. And these are freshmen.
Wow.
And so, yeah, yeah, these are freshmen saying this. So, because they're always like, "Oh, is she going to be hard? Is she going to be easy?" But I already am questioning them. Why did you write this down? Or there was one assignment they did and it wasn't very good. So I said, okay. And I went to the board, modeled it and said, this is exactly what I want. Um, ensure logical flow, but prove your point. And I'm always quoted by my students, I want meat with that answer. Give me like this much of a response. So when I ask you about it, you can cite evidence per that story or novel or whatever that may be, news piece, that you can cite your evidence and be able to explain why that proves your point.
And so, how do you put love in that? Because that's the process. And you said respect, but what are you doing so that they know you care? Because it's very evident that you do.
I bring in food. I seriously have. There was one situation where a student didn't do well. He never did well on vocabulary quizzes. I would give the vocabulary words on Monday, and every Friday we would have a vocab quiz. That was my standard every week. So some of the kids always knew Monday vocab words, Friday, the quiz. So this one student in particular didn't ever do well. So I told the class, I said on Monday, okay, I'm going to give these words out. I said, and if so and so gets a 100 Friday, pizza party. They're like, what? I said, yeah, no, pizza party for the class. And there's about 25 kids in the class. So I said, pizza party. So what was really interesting, there was a couple of things that happened. The kids would come into class and every day they would quiz this particular student on some of the vocab words. So I'm like, okay, that's cool. That's really nice. And it kind of built that family, because that's another thing that's really important to me. I said, no one's better than anybody else ever, anywhere. I don't care how much money you have or what you look like or anything like that. We're all equal. Okay. And so they would quiz him on it. And Friday, the test comes. So everybody takes their test, they bring it up. I grade his first, 100. So I announced
The,
to the class, kids, so and so got 100. And they're like, yeah, yeah, slapping them on the back and everything. And they're like, pizza. I'm like, yep, you're right, pizza. But the best part of that was not only did the student look like a hero for the class, because thank you, we have pizza now, but he came up to me and after class and said that was the first 100 he's ever received.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And so for our listeners, so I love the stories that come out of these episodes, and that one brings tears to my eyes because Danette, seriously, Danette touched on a couple really powerful things, right? She knew the team. It wasn't money. She knew that pizza would make their hearts go pitter patter. And then she got the whole team, the classroom involved.
Hmm.
I want you to think
Hmm.
about how you can do this. And here's the beauty of how these things work. So I'm gonna tell you a story, Danette. Let me look at it. So literally 2 hours ago, at one of my businesses, the body shop. I bought everybody in the team ice cream, and you'd have thought I'd
Mm.
given them gold. You'd have thought I'd given
Oh,
them
it's so
gold.
it's the little things, the spontaneous little things.
What, and it's to your point. It's knowing them well enough to know that pizza party is going to be a big deal. I want to share with you, and I want this to lead into something else. I read a book by Phil Jackson, The 11 Rings. I don't know if you've read it, but he had 11 championships, and six of those were with the Chicago Bulls. And in
Hmm.
part of that book, he said when he was with the Chicago Bulls, every year he would buy everybody on the team a book. And but he wouldn't buy the same book. He knew each
Hmm.
player well enough to buy them a book
Mm.
for their specific interest.
Wow. Hmm.
Right, right.
That's
And so,
awesome.
well, I think that's like when I've gone into companies and corporations, I've asked the leaders, managers, CEOs, could you buy your team a book? Not the same book for everybody, but a book for each of them
Right.
that would be
Personal.
right. That would be something that's their interest. So let's talk about reading for a little bit. I was
Sure. My favorite.
well, one of mine too, and so I'd like you to share with our listeners why is it important to read? When we talk about personal development, I think it's at the top of my list, but I'd like to know why you think it's so important to read for personal development.
Again, well, obviously, number one is become educated. I like to read a lot of nonfiction too. I mean, in front of me, I have so many books: Extreme Ownership, Dare to Lead, 48 Laws of Power, Leaders Eat Last, all kinds of, Think Again, Atomic Habits. I have all these self-help books, if you will, that have been really instrumental in helping me kind of figure out what I want to do with my life. Because I think life with chapters, I know it's cliche, but yeah, you just it lets you think about other opportunities. Um, Also, again, when you read something, why, again, the critical thinking, why, what do you like about it? What are the main ideas? What are you extracting from that you can apply to your personal life? So obviously reading, and it's fun. There's so many cool things that you can learn just if you read, just what about other countries. I mean, it makes me want to go. Uh, Being a better person. I had read the book Flow. It's about happiness. I mean, you know, it just gives you a different frame of mind where you're not walking around kind of all, doom or just in a bad situation. It makes you think of the positive aspects of life.
Well, I would agree with you, and I think that you touched on something that's very powerful there, and I'd like to share it with our listeners. One of the things that there are no magic books, there are just the magic things that you do by taking action from something that you learned in the book. So thank you for pointing that out. And you also pointed something else out that I'd like our listeners to understand. When I read a book, I read it like I'm having a conversation with the author. Do I agree with them?
Hmm.
Do I not agree with them? Do I have a question about something? Do I believe that to be accurate? Is that something I need to go, like to your point earlier with empathy? Do I need to go investigate? Is that really something that is something that's the truth that I can hang my hat on? And then also I'm not afraid to use a book like a learning tool, right? I highlight stuff. I dog ear the pages. And I'm also right. And I get a thumbs up for those of you that are listening and can't see. Did that give me a big thumbs up? And but and so I think it's I'm literally interacting with the author. I'm engaged with what they're saying and what's going on in that. What are the things that you do when you read a book?
Oh gosh. Well, as a teacher, I mean, I'm hardcore, have to have my book, have my highlighters out. I write little notes on the side. Again, if I'm responsible for teaching these students something, I have to know more than they do. And some of my students are pretty smart. So I always look for little fun facts. I'm constantly, continually, even over all the years of teaching, looking for new information to apply to, certain parts of the book. Um,
Okay, stop. I
I,
need to interrupt for just a second.
yeah,
I just
yeah,
want to.
sure.
So she just dropped more than a golden nugget. I want you to understand that we're talking to a first class teacher who is taught around the world. And the reason why I know she's a first class teacher is because she gets the same results whatever country she goes to teach. But she just said something that I think everybody needs to understand. Even though she's a world-class teacher, she's consistently learning new things. And I think a lot of people start to get stagnant because they think they've gotten to some plateau and they don't need to learn anymore. As a leader, it's your responsibility to continue to learn and continue to
Yeah.
add value to those around you. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but go on, please.
No, no, because I was going to say situations change, people change. So you continuously, I totally believe in that. You have to be a lifelong learner. I think it keeps you informed. I think it keeps you engaged. Um, do I want parallel structure here? I think I have to think of another one, another verb. Um, you know what? It keeps you exciting because people want to talk to you because you're interesting. And I think reading gives that to you. Reading, traveling, just talking to people makes you interesting. And that's why, as I get older, I still want to be interesting. People
So
want to hang out with me.
preach it, sister, preach it. I can tell you,
Yeah.
well, because it's the truth, right? I'm long over the boring conversations about the weather or about what the Chicago Bears did or with your sports team in your area, right? I want to talk about things that engage and stimulate my mind. And I love to have conversations with people that have a different point of view because it opens my brain to a whole different possibility. But reading stimulates these powerful conversations with people. And that's when you learn, and I'd like you to talk about this for a little bit because I've
Hmm.
learned mentoring the high school kids with Future Business Leaders of America, FBLA.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
have gained so much wisdom from the students, right?
Yeah.
I am always a student myself. Can you talk about
Hmm.
that? How you're constantly learning from people that some people would to you when we talked about kind of going full circle, some people would judge somebody as young and saying they don't have wisdom, they don't have anything I can learn from them. Can you talk about that for a little bit, please?
Yeah, because they definitely know more than myself in terms of technology and social media, and uh, they can teach me about what it's like for them growing up in this age. Because I was saying, back in my day, we didn't even have computers.
Right.
I remember when I was in college, I had my Smith Corona electric typewriter, and going to the computer lab at 2 or 3 in the morning, running what it was, a PL1 or Fortran, and having the stacks of papers that you had to put into the computer. Um, and now they have literally the world at their fingertips.
And it's interesting to me because you just said something very powerful again, and you just keep dropping these
Oh,
golden nuggets that are big. And one of them is that we really truly live in an age where you can learn anything by going to the computer. I
yeah.
mean, anything. I have a friend of mine, she's in Kentucky, and she's actually building a little house. And this is a woman who's an event planner, and she went on YouTube and watched
Hmm.
7 or 8, 9 videos, and she's building walls.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's what I mean. I mean, you can. It doesn't matter how old you are. I mean, I don't judge people by their age, because you can learn from anybody. I mean, it's a simple matter of asking somebody for directions somewhere, in another country. I mean, I'm not going to act like I know where I'm going, and oh, you're too young to know this information. I think you have to go with that. And the people nowadays, they do have different ideas. And what's to say mine's better than theirs or theirs is better than mine? But if we can kind of mesh them together, you know, that's what makes it work. You have to be
Yeah,
open minded.
right. I think that's very critical and very important, especially in today's age, right? We've gotten to a point where nobody's open to the conversation. You
Hmm.
either completely agree with me or you're an idiot. We're not going to have a conversation.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's gotten us to where we are in the world today. One of the things I'd like to share a quick story is I saw Will Smith on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno, and this is long before he slapped the crap out of Chris Rock, and
Hmm.
talk
Yeah.
about going from hero to zero in a flash.
Right.
But
Right.
he was promoting the movie Independence Day,
Oh
and
yeah. Love that
yeah,
movie.
yeah, and Jay Leno asked him a question and said, "Hey, what's your secret?" to success because he'd been a rap star and then he'd been a sitcom TV star. And at this point now he's a big movie star. And Chris said, I'm sorry, Will Smith said, reading and running. And so these are guys are naturally two comedians, but Jay Leno doesn't get funny. Jay Leno asks Will Smith to explain. And Will Smith said, running, because he said, when I had to get in shape for this movie, I realized my body could run further than my brain thought. And he said, reading, because he said, I don't care who you are or what your problem is. Somebody's already had the same problem, figured it out, and wrote the answer
Mhm.
down in a book,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And, and,
Yeah.
and one and one of the things I share with people is an app out there called Hoopla. If you have a library card, you can download audiobooks for free. So if you're too darn lazy to actually read, now I don't know about you, but I love the feel of a book in my hands. And
Me too. Yeah.
yeah, I listen to some books, but I really still like to read. What's
Mhm.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners on how to develop personal development around learning?
I mean, I would just be kind of reiterating what I've mentioned already. Is just be open-minded, um, be willing to learn, and also understand. Um, oh, and also, if you don't know vocabulary words, look them up, because we tend to. I get lazy too, and I'm like, oh, what's this word? Because, and the only reason I do is because I think a student may ask me about it. But it's so important because I don't think we're expanding our vocabulary either. So if there are some great imagery and they're using these awesome words, I want to know exactly what they're saying. And I'll ask the students, why did they pick that particular word or passage? How profound is that? Or an example of allusion, reference to the history, Bible, literature, any of science, anything like that. I said, well, why would the author specifically pick that example versus a different example? And this is again into that critical thinking. Well, maybe he or she really want to expand on the fact, whatever that may be. So again, any little nugget in there, I can analyze the heck out of. Like I said, I wrote a 4-page paper on one painting. And then in high school, my research paper was 40 pages long, and I dressed as Gandalf to present because I had to talk about The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. My dad brought in dry ice. It was pretty cool. But again, reading and and I was telling my students this today. As a matter of fact, I said all the kids. I was a senior. All the kids had one book to read, and my teacher said, "You're going to read The Hobbit and the trilogy." And of course, me being a typical teenager said, "Well, that's not fair. Why do I have to read 4 books?" And all he said was, "I know you can do it."
Oh,
No ifs, ands, or buts. And you know what? He was right. I had my little back then, my stack of note cards and all rubber band together, and I had my typewriter here, and it kept me organized. And I went to the library, as you mentioned, did checked out all the books and just did a bunch of research that way.
yeah, that's so Danette just dropped a couple other things very powerful. One of them is the ability to push yourself past what you think you can do, right? And as leaders, we often have to put that into other people and let them know that they can do that. I read something that's very fascinating, and I want you to, as our listeners, to take this away with you. She said, on my phone, I have the app Webster's Dictionary, and I put it on my phone on purpose. I read every day. Every day I read something, and I choose that specifically, right? Something that I'm interested in, and I'm like you, Danette. I'm interested in darn near everything, right? I just because I'm curious about everything. But my point to this is to what Danette said. I learned that if you come to a word and you're learning something or reading something and you don't know the definition of that word, your brain will not remember anything after that.
Right.
It's right. And so what I do now when I'm reading, I'll go to my phone, I'll go to my Webster's Dictionary app, I look up that word, and then I go back. And to your point, Danette, I go back to the beginning of the sentence and start again. And then I say the definition in my head when I get to that word, and that whole sentence changes. It completely morphs into something much richer and deeper than it was initially. And I'm always glad that I took the time to look up that word, because it is, people use those words not necessarily to impress you, but to to spin or to paint a picture that's going to be much more precise to what they had in their mind.
Yeah, plus it always expands. It's just good to expand your vocabulary. I mean, it's always cool. I love the word exacerbate. And it was funny. I had a friend of mine when I worked at Apple, and her dad told her, she told me that her dad gave her a word of the week forever, like she was little. And I thought, that's pretty cool. She had a vocabulary. Her dad gave her a vocabulary, one vocabulary word a week for what, like 15 years? Well,
Yeah.
10 years. I'm spacing it out, but I thought that was, wow, that's pretty fascinating. And her dad was very high up in an organization, very, very smart guy. But I thought that was so cool that he did that.
Yeah, and again, another great story that's going to teach our listeners a couple of things, right? One, the power of little things done consistently. One word, right? Just one word a week, one word a week. And this is what I like to share with people. If you read one book a month, which is very doable, you read one book a month, at the end of the year, you've read 12 books. You realize how the average person, the average American, reads less than a book in their lifetime. In their
Sixth
lifetime.
grade, sixth grade reading level. Did I read somewhere? I'll check my sources because my daughter taught me that. She's a journalist. But when I heard that the average reading level of an American is about, maybe, definitely not higher than eighth grade, I'm like, oh my gosh. So that's that needs to change because reading is just fun and educational and just all that.
And I think it actually becomes a little addicting because for me, I love like I said, I love the conversation with these people that have life experiences that I don't know or I haven't experienced. So whether you want to, learn a new book, I'm sorry, learn a new word every week or read a book a month, and think about the span of a lifetime, right? This is how I learned from Darren Hardy that, these little incremental steps is how you change the game. But it's little steps over a stretch of time. You've been a runner, you travel, you do all these things. One of the things, just a brief comment about learning. So I've watched Danette literally travel around the world, and she told me that she can pack. And now this is a woman. For you listeners, this is a woman who can pack in a backpack, right? You can pack a backpack, and you're gone for weeks.
Oh, weeks, 4 months.
Well,
I
there
was
you
just
go.
I was just in Europe for 4 months and I had my Osprey 55L backpack and I'm
And
really
that
good.
and that was
I'm
it,
really
right?
good at packing. Yeah, that was it. Yeah,
But
two
but
pairs of
that's
shoes for a woman? What? Two pairs of shoes? What?
but but that's the power of learning and that life experience, right? Of you did it, you tried it, you revamped the process
Adapt.
and you yep, and adapt to what you needed and what's really critical and important and what's a bunch of waste that people just drag around.
And that what makes a good leader. Be adaptable too.
Right,
Flexible.
without a doubt. You've got as a leader, you've got to be adaptable and flexible because nothing, this is one of the things I've come to understand. Nothing stays the same.
No.
N-
And
Nothing stays the same.
how boring that would be.
Right, right. And so in that moment of the constant change, you just have to be kind of calm and patient and kind of like watching a show and be curious of what's going on in front of you, but not react
Hmm.
and blow up and be the crazy person because nobody likes that person as a leader.
Well, and I can relate to that just by traveling to all these other countries and the transportation, you know, looking for the trains and figuring out which way. Oh, okay, looks like I'm going the wrong way, so I have to look and in Chinese. Okay, I think I better get off here and take the other one, go on the other side. And even when I was in Japan, they're very particular with how you go up and down the stairs. You have to be on the opposite or the escalator, and I think the stairs you have to go on and then the opposite side that we're used to. So you have to become accustomed to that. I told the story today again about culture. In Japan, I'm at a ramen restaurant, and all these guys are sitting next to me, and they're all have their bowl of ramen. They're going slurping really loud. And I said, oh, it is true. The louder you slurp, the more that you enjoy the food. And I'm like, wow. So what you read comes to fruition too. So that's
Right.
another thing, especially reading about the other cultures. You're like, oh, that does happen. Okay, all right, but but it was still interesting to hear that.
Yeah, well, and I think that one of the things that I've really gained from traveling around the world is that at the end of the day, the majority of us are living with just an extreme amount of luxury, right? We take running water, roof over our
Yes.
head, food,
Mhm.
warm
Mhm.
water, clean water. We take it for granted. And you've been there too. There's places in the world they don't have clean water, or that when
Right.
they, they lay down at night, they're under the stars.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Is
it makes you appreciate what you have, but I also found that we're all the same because people will ask me, "What are the kids like in this country or this, here?" I said, "Kids are kids, and you know what? As human beings, we all have the same for the most part, we have the same values. We all care about family. We're respectful. Um, we like to be with other people. We're social beings. So that's what you find. We're all the same.
Yeah, there's a great song by Styx. I think it's off the
Oh,
Grand
sticks!
Illusion album.
Wow.
Yeah,
Uh huh.
yeah, yeah. But there's a line in a song, and that's exactly what it says. Deep inside, we're all the same, because we
Yeah.
all want to be respected. We all want to be heard. We all want to be
Yes.
loved. We all want to be appreciated. It's the
Right.
same, and we
Exactly.
all
Hmm.
and we all have the natural desire to be part of a community. I think that's why leadership is so important because there were in our history there was a time when if you were banned from the group you would die, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Back in the
Hmm.
day,
Hmm.
when we were being chased by saber-toothed tigers. So we still have this
Yeah.
innate.
You have to be faster,
That's right. But we
faster
have
than the
this.
other person.
Yeah, yeah. You don't want to be the slowest one in the crowd. But we have this innate desire to be part of a community, and that's because it's passed down from thousands of years because there was safety in that community and there was longevity, right? Because you could teach and I could go build a house and somebody else could plant the food and that kind of stuff. So and I think that's when we talk about leadership, I think that's the importance. And you said this earlier about your students, and I'd like to share it with everybody. In an organization, there's really nobody any more important than anybody else because
Hmm.
it's like
Right.
the line of dominoes, right? You take one domino out, the thing stops.
Hmm. Well, and then I think we tend to forget, how did these people get to the top? All the people underneath built that up to the top. So everybody is part of that critical mass that made that company, or whatever that may be, that organization successful. It's not just one person. Maybe one person has a great idea, but you can have great ideas, but if you don't know how to act upon them, it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't. And one of the things I've come to understand is anybody that we've ever known throughout history that's done anything great on a big scale, they've
Hmm.
never done it by themselves.
Of course not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Again, I love that you were open to being interviewed and that we didn't have any format because I love doing it that way because your stories came out and all this great wisdom. And, and, and really, this is another one of those episodes where people should listen to it a couple of times because you drop so many golden nuggets about empathy and literally looking up vocabulary words, leading from the front with love and, the importance of reading, how to be courageous, those kinds of things. I will share this one last thing with you. When we talk about vocabulary words, I would ask our leaders that are listening to challenge you. I challenge you to pick a word. So, for example, my word for this year is courage. I'm stepping out of my comfort zone. I never thought in a million years I'd be doing a podcast, and as it's going to launch, um, we're recording this before it actually launches, and so I have the fear of will people make fun of me? Am I good enough to do it? And all those kinds of things, and that's why my word for this year is courage. And then all year long, I keep that word in my brain, and I think, okay, what can I do this week to step out of my comfort zone and use courage to try something new? And I think you model that better than anybody I've known in my life in that. And I spent time in the Marines. for you to step out of your comfort zone and be courageous enough to travel halfway around the world all by yourself and then start
Yeah.
teaching and traveling the world is one of the most
Hmm.
courageous things I've ever watched anybody do.
Thank you. I just really enjoy it. You made me think of a book. I love the book called The Alchemist, and I even have you can't see it, but I have a tattoo on my wrist, and it's a picture of a man, and he's following like these rays of sunlight, and then you have the sun over here, and it kind of reminds me to stay on my path. I have my goal, like you have your goals, and I think it's great that you're doing the podcast and the leadership, everything. I'm like, that's fantastic. My goal, I think, is now I've decided I probably am going to be interested in tutoring. Starting like a tutoring business because I would love what you're doing. I think it's awesome what you're doing. Um, but I think I'm gonna do what I know, and I tutored ACT for a long time. I've been a teacher and I've been to other countries and I know there is a need for English. So I'm probably going to pursue that route along with my books that I'm writing right now, depending on my mood. But I've got several different novel book ideas and simultaneously working on those as well. So yeah, you're giving me the courage to just stay on my path because it doesn't end no matter how old you are. I don't buy into that. Oh, you're a certain age, you should be. Why are you still working? You should be enjoying your leisure. Well, what am I going to do when I'm not doing something?
Right.
I said you have to continuously learn. It's so
I could
important and find purpose.
I agree. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think for me, people, people tell me all the time, Louis, you don't act your age, you don't look your age. It's because I'm engaged in life. I'm having fun, right? My work is fun to me. It's not work, it's fun. And I
Right.
think yeah, and I think that's the power of being you and I could go on for days at this point because
Yeah.
if we let into
Hmm.
purpose, because, and again, when you're doing things that move your heart and you touch, and this is one of the reasons why I tell you all the time, I love you because you touch people's hearts, right? And seriously, you touch people's hearts and they don't forget that. And if you just did that to one person, your whole life would be worthwhile, but you do it you've done it to thousands of people, and you're going to do it to thousands of people more before you take your last breath. And that, my friend, is a beautiful thing.
Oh, well, thank you.
You're quite welcome. And thanks again for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And for all our listeners out there, you can track down Danette. She's out there on the internet. She's on Facebook. I highly recommend you reach out and watch her on Facebook because she posts some of the most beautiful pictures, literally from around the world. I've told her many times she's got a great eye for color and a great eye for the angles of things. And so check her out on Facebook if you want to learn more about her. And again, Danette, thank you very much for being here. And I love you and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Oh, thank you, Louie.
Thanks again for joining us and listening to this episode of Leadership and Love. I would like to challenge you to ask yourself, what's one thing that you heard today that you can implement immediately to improve your leadership and accelerate your growth? If you've gotten value out of this episode or learned something that you can implement today, we'd ask that you please share it with those that you care about. Our goal is to create more leaders who are leading with love.